Thank you all for coming along to this session for half an hour. Caroline and I met a year ago at a conference where we were both speaking, and we presented on a couple of topics, and over a cup of coffee afterwards we said, there seems to be a bit of a gap. Lots of people are talking about the Chief Data Officer, the Chief Data Officer's role. A lot of people are talking about they know where they are with their data, and they know where they want to be, but nobody actually knows how to bridge that gap between there and there. So Caroline and I said, well, why don't we put a few thoughts together of what we've done over the last few years and put it into a book. So that's what we've done. This is our reflections on what we have done, what we've got right, also what we've got wrong, but also it's a collection of ideas from talking to people like you, from the conferences and the conversations we've had over the last year, the teams we've worked with. So it's a collation of your ideas as much as it is of ours. And I think it's a great thing about the data community at the moment is this willingness to share and collaborate good practice, things that don't work, great ideas, and insights on what to try next and when to try it. So we very much see this book not as the end, not as this is how you do it, but very much as the start of a conversation between the data community.
Okay, so I can just second Peter's thanks there to everybody because we really have learnt so much from all of you. What we'd like to do is just quickly flick through each of the chapters in the book to give you a little bit of insight on if you do feel like taking pity on us and buying it, what you'll be getting. So the very first one is about why does anybody need a Chief Data Officer? Organisations have worked perfectly well without one, right? No, a few shaking heads in the room. Some have, some haven't. Starting with an organisation, people don't know what they're getting with a Chief Data Officer. And the chapter's about trying to articulate what it is and why you would need one. Now, I love this. So obviously, as soon as the book's out, these are not going to be quite so secret ingredients of a Chief Data Officer anymore. But what we've tried to do is there are many different disciplines and many different people coming into the Chief Data Officer space. It's why I think we're finding it such a passionate and interesting and engaging space to be part of. And I know it's a community that I feel really lucky to be part of. But what it does mean is there's lots of different skill sets that you need when you're being a Chief Data Officer. So I'm not going to spoil it and tell you what the secret ingredients are, but I think you'll be pleasantly surprised on how few of those secret ingredients are technology orientated.
The next chapter is about the first 100 days. Caroline and I have both been through this experience twice in the last 2 years. So this chapter is quite a long one with lots of scars and blood in it.
We are obviously masochists to do this twice.
And it is a guide of what we did in the first 100 days in our roles at the pensions regulator, at Southern Water, at Network Rail, and at Lowell Bank. It's not prescriptive, but it will give some idea of what we tried to do and why we were trying to do it. And this kind of relates into the next chapter, if you'll take me there, which is delivering a data strategy whilst the business is still going on. A Chief Data Officer or a Head of Data can't arrive and just say, right, stop doing everything with data whilst I get it all sorted out. The business has to continue whilst you're trying to develop a data strategy and deliver it. And this chapter looks at some of the problems you will face, or we faced in doing that, and how we overcame them, and added business value as quickly as we possibly could whilst the business was still functioning.
Think of it as supplying chocolate and water to a marathon runner. Okay. I love this one. Now, if anybody knows anything about Gartner, they know that the hype cycle is quite a famous slide that Gartner used quite often. What we've done is we've talked about this in context of what it feels like to start a new job. When you start a new job, there is a massive amount of expectations. And I know, like you say, we've both been through it twice, and I know there's other CDOs in the room who've been through it as well. You start, and I've done it twice now, where both times I walked in and it was just me, with massively high expectations, no team, and the rest of the management team going, so what are you going to do? So the chapter has to hopefully help get over some of the little hurdles that you'll find in your, when you start a new job, and some strategies for helping you get over it. Now, out of all the cartoons, and there are some brilliant cartoons in the book, this is possibly my favourite one. And I don't know if you can see it at the back, but it's basically got some really well-established C-suite roles on a nice shiny table, and the CDO sitting at the little plastic table on the side. Because currently, that's a bit how it feels, where in addition to the C-suite, most C-suite roles are very well established. You know, I don't see anybody asking a chief finance officer what they do. Anybody heard that one recently? But people still do ask us, what does a chief data officer do? And more importantly, how do we fit with the rest of the C-suite? What are we bringing to the party? And what are the type of roles that we really need to spend time engaging with and working with?
You could leave that one there for a minute, Caroline. The other point I pull out this one is the relationship with the rest of the C-suite. It covered in the panel this morning a bit as to where this role reports into. And I don't think it really matters where that role reports into, so long as the CDO is empowered to get on with their job, empowered to actually deliver that transformation and business value. We then looked at the Chief Data Officer as a disruptor, and I think that in a later chapter we talk about a first generation and a second generation CDO. And certainly, I don't think a first generation CDO, somebody who is the very first data owner function in an organization, is necessarily a disruptor. I think it's too risky. I think a disruptor truly is somebody who takes a business which is progressing in this organization and makes a left turn, changes the business model, changes the products and the way they're delivered. I see, and I think we both see, the Chief Data Officer, certainly the first generation one, as an innovator. Somebody who's going to take the business rapidly forward along the path that they know they want to go along, rather than disrupting the business model. It may be slightly different for a second generation Chief Data Officer who's coming in, following on those foundations that have been built. Building the Chief Officer, Data Officer team. We've both been doing it recently and in the past, and it's really about people. It really is about having the right people who've got the right vision, who can buy into the vision, who are interested in data. And I'll have to be careful again here because of colleagues at the back, but I made this comment last week. The best person I've ever worked with in data was a chap who had a philosophy degree. He wasn't a specialist data. He just got it. And he got understanding the business and how data could be applied to the business.
So both Peter and I feel really strongly that this is something you need to spend a lot of your time on. Your people really are one of the most valuable assets inside and outside the business. So the next 300 days. So we talked about what the first 100 days are like, and just in case it's a spoiler alert, the first 100 days are a massive roller coaster in any job, but this job, looking at the remit and what you're covering, it is absolutely incredible. None of that stops. You don't suddenly get to the first 100 days and go, there you go, I can relax now, I've got nothing to worry about. It doesn't work like that. So what we've tried to do is put in place the strategies that we've used, the practical things that you need to worry about and maybe not worry about in the next 300 days, and how you can use that to really build yourself a firm foundation and a successful future as a CDO. The different generations of CDO, and Peter started talking about this first. Currently, we've coined the term the first generation and the second generation CDO. The first generation is very much what we both see ourselves as. We turn up in an organisation that haven't had a chief data officer before. What do you do? How does it feel like? And what are the kind of things that you need to worry about? And what's the difference between a first generation and a second generation? So not that I'm jealous in any way, shape or form, but for me, a second generation CDO gets to do all the highly technical whizzy-bang stuff. I like to use technical terms like that, where you can get into some of the real driving insights and value through the business. And what we've also started to tackle is, what does it mean building on that? Because it's not about always being a first generation and a second generation. So what does it mean when we come to a third generation CDO? And what kind of impact is that going to have on the market as well?
We rapidly realised from talking to the data community, we all come from different backgrounds. And so what we tried to look at here was trying to understand what sort of CDO are you? What is your background? Are you from strategy? Are you from governance? Are you from technology? Are you from data science? And perhaps those all overlap, and in the middle you find a unicorn, which I don't think anybody will ever find, but it's really helpful to understand, both for the C-suite, the rest of the C-suite, also for the recruiters, but also for ourselves, to understand where we think we've come from in the background. And in a model of strengths-based leadership, at that point, it's important to recruit people around you into your data team who can fill those gaps. So if you're a strategy person, you need to fill it with your techies. You need to have that technical support in the data world. Or you might need to have the data scientists there to support you. How do you present yourself as CDO? Kind of interweaves with the other chapters. How do you have those relationships with the C-suite? How do you have that relationship with your team? How do you present yourself, perhaps if you want to apply for a job as a CDO, you're currently looking for that position, the sorts of things you should talk about, the sorts of things you should present about yourselves.
So I love this chapter. So Peter said at the very beginning that we drew on a lot of other people's experiences. So I hate embarrassing people when they're not expecting it. But if everybody would like to turn around to that gentleman right there who's going to wave any second now, that gentleman's Tim Carmichael and wrote this chapter for us. Thank you, Tim. I'll think about it. It's a lovely little Easter egg in the middle of the book, and it's actually describing a story of different types of data people that you will find on your journey. And it is a fantastic read in the middle of the book. We didn't think that we could have a book and not address the technology and the relationship between the CDO and the technology. So what we've done is break it down into a separate chapter rather than try and filter it all the way through the book. As much as we keep saying that the data isn't part of the IT department, they obviously have a very close role to play, and it's something that you need to get working together, and this is what we talk about.
This is very much one of Caroline's chapters, so a bit shocked to see this slide coming up. But I think there is a mentality in many organisations, particularly for data people who first arrive, that they've kept everything. More is better. And there is this hoarding mentality of collecting data. And it's not only of collecting the data and keeping it, but it's actually just collecting more data without ever deciding on what is value. And in my mind, certainly, good is better than more.
Just to add to it, because you're right, this is one of my little favourites. It started from, has anybody seen that show about hoarding on TV, where people can't actually live in the house anymore? I was watching that one Sunday with my son, and it suddenly occurred to me that that is what we do in organisations. You know, you see them desperately trying to follow teeny-weeny little paths through their house, and they can't use the cooker anymore to cook because it's stacked full of magazines from 10 years ago. And it was the realization for me that is what we're doing in our organizations. We're finding paths round what we should be doing rather than just focusing on what we need. Sorry.
Data information ethics. Great saying. Just because we can doesn't mean we should. And I think that in organizations, we're getting clearer and clearer boundaries, partly because of GDPR, about what we can and we're allowed to do with data. But we feel that quite often the Chief Data Officer is that person who's putting the ethics around it. Should we think about this twice? We could go that far, but is that too creepy? Is it the right thing to do? Should we be keeping that data? We might be allowed to, but is it a good thing to keep it anyway? So ethics are a very important part around data.
Data governance. Now, obviously, this is one of the sexier chapters in the book. Everybody nod? Data governance isn't boring. I know it can come across that way, but a lot of what we're trying to do in this chapter is talk about how it's assurance and how it enables the business, but how fundamentally important it is. If anybody caught the panel that we were on earlier on, some of the things we talked about was there are some amazing opportunities in the future around IoT, blockchain, AI. It's fantastic. all of which is built on a good data foundation. So without good, proper governance, it's not going to work for you. So that's why we wanted to spend a little bit of time going through in a bit more detail the kind of fundamentals that you need to put in place to make sure that not only do you have good data governance, but you keep it that way. The data revolution. That's why everybody's here today, isn't it? Well, actually, I think what you'll find is this data revolution is more about what you need to do internally. So it's the data revolution that you'll lead within your own organizations. Anybody who thinks that you write a policy and you put it in a book and then all of a sudden the organization will change their behaviors is probably deluding themselves. I cannot tell you how many projects I've worked on, IT projects, and I've never seen that work once. In fact, if anybody has, I'd love to see you put your hand up. Okay, I'll take that as a no. A big part of being a chief data officer is about the relationships you build and the change that you drive within your organizations. And we wanted, again, to make sure that that had the right level of focus within the book, because it's a really fundamental part to what you'll play.
This is the final chapter. We decided we wanted to provide some advice to business owners, CEOs, or the board about a CDO. Where do you find one? What do they look like? When you found one, or even before you found one, how do you articulate the role? What is it you're actually looking for? And I think a lot of the job descriptions I've seen over the last 18 months, when you actually get into them, you start talking to the organisation, what they need is probably not what they've described. And once you start a conversation with them, it then begins to pivot and they begin to understand what it is they really want. So some interesting pieces in here by some recruiters, talking about how to go about recruiting a CDO, the skill sets you ought to look for, and also how you get them interested. And I think it is true about many of the roles that are out there in data. What will really interest data people is interesting data and interesting opportunities and a chance to make a difference and transform businesses and transform ways of delivering business rather than where it is in the country or the package that goes with it. So we give advice as to what a chief data officer looks like, where to find one, how to get one, how to attract one, where to put one, and how to keep one.
So what we just wanted to say is the reason it's not called a handbook is we're not trying to stand here and pretend that we have this all right and that we know exactly what we're doing. I think that this is a very maturing role at the moment. It's becoming professionalised, and this, for us, is the start of a journey, definitely not the end of it. What we've tried to put in place is something that we genuinely hope you'll find useful in your data journeys. And feel free, contribute to the conversations. Please contribute on LinkedIn, come to forums like this. Get up and speak, because that's the only way we're going to be able to share this kind of knowledge with each other. We know that we've learned so much this year, and despite the fact I embarrassed him, and he'll probably kick me later for it, he's just one of a large number of people we have got so much from. So thank you all very much.
Thank you for coming.
We've made sure that we've got about 10 minutes for questions. We've got a slight shortage of mics, so I'm happy to do a little bit of running around if that helps. But do we have any questions in the room? We were that good. Excellent. Hold on.
You can whisper the answer in my ear.
I just, either of you, obviously it's all about self-service BI is a thing now, and we want to empower people. A CDO is going to be looking from the top down. They're looking at people, what tools they're using. Do you find that operational managers within businesses are capable of using self-service BI tools, or do you really need to ensure that they've got pre-arranged dashboards and stuff, and you're looking from the top down, as it were?
I think it's a blend of the two. I think that undoubtedly it's a journey that an organisation is going on, and I think landing send service tools on them immediately and saying get on with it is probably a bit too far. I think that is the aspiration we all want to get to. I think what's really important behind those self-service tools is, to Caroline's point clearly, it's the governed and managed data. I don't mind people using self-service tools, and I think data democratization is where we want to get to, but they've got to be working from governed and managed data in the back. And I think that some parts of the business will be more up for self-service tools, and others will just be wanting to have that dashboard, perhaps that they can drill down with and move around a cube of data. But yeah, I mean, aspirational, definitely.
We talk, sorry, just to feed into it, we talk a lot about data lakes. So I know we've mentioned them so far today. I'm actually not terribly big fan of data lakes. I much prefer the term of governed data, because if you don't have governed data, what you have is a swamp, and that's not going to do anybody any good.
Hi, I'm just intrigued on your statement at the start when you arrive as the first CDO. And it seems to me that you may well be in a place where you inherit the situation where you pick up all the really hard problems. You know, we've got security issues, we don't trust our data, we don't trust our analytics. But fundamentally, you're trying to wrestle a role for yourself at the C-suite and kind of get off my land a bit. How have you broached that gap? What's your top tip?
That's very deceptive. Secret ingredients of CTO, just to give you some idea, and that might answer your question. I think one of the big things is communication. I think in the first generation CDO, you have to be really, really good at communicating. To the highest level and at the coalface. You have to be able to articulate that vision and deliver it top and bottom, constantly, all the time, staying on message. I think the second thing is having a passion for data. So it's convincing people that data is really important, being able to deliver it all the time, just talking about data, and showing the value of data. I'm going to give them all away. I think another one is actually being able to blend that tactics with strategy. In other words, how you can keep people interested at the C-suite, how you can be delivering business value, and keeping them amused over here with the new and shiny, whilst you're doing a hard slog over here. And in terms of that elbow room, the more business value you add, the easier it is. And I think the last one, there are a couple in between, I'm not going to give them all away. The last one is luck. Absolute luck. You actually have to have a huge amount of luck, a good dose of luck, recruiting the right people, actually reading the ground right in the first place. Because if you get it wrong, you might head off in the wrong direction.
I think having a big coffee and cake budget, because you're going to spend a lot of time just talking to people, explaining how you're going to make their life better.
Hi there, Roger Tomlinson, JC Chapman. We talk about chief data officers being C-suite. I would question if the chief data officer is currently actually C-suite on the basis that the majority of CDOs don't sit at the top table. And I think more importantly, even in the second generation of CDOs, there are very, very few CDOs within the marketplace who actually control their own budget to get things done. CDOs typically tend to have to beg, borrow and steal budget from other areas of the business to implement the work that they want to be doing to move the business forward into a data culture. So I suppose the question is, how does a CDO overcome that particular challenge?
Again, another great question, and I think it's a question that has been asked all over the place, and I refer the gentleman to my previous answer. I think you're right. I don't sit at the very highest level, but I do have access to somebody who empowers me. And I think it's being positioned into that C-suite or into the board or the directors, wherever it is, with somebody who empowers you both with budget and with decision making to get on and deliver the data transformation you need. That's the real trick. You cannot deliver a data strategy if you're not empowered to do so.
I also think where you start off may not be where you end up, because in both of my roles, my initial starting point got budged up on very, very quickly once you started to talk about the strategy. So you really do have to capitalise on the value you can deliver. So I'm sure that you do, but I control my own budget, and I control my own budget in the last one as well.
Yeah. I mean, to Caroline's point there exactly, my current role, I signed a contract, I was reporting to one director, I arrived to a different one, and within a week it was the third one. I'm in the right place now.
a lot of the talks today have been about like advanced data science, data streaming, and things like that. But from when I speak to companies, a lot of them don't seem to have their like BI in order or their data governance, which we've spoken about a lot generally. Like, how much of your time, because you mentioned to the C-level people, they get excited by all the shiny things and the real-time stuff. Like, how much of your time is getting the fundamentals right versus like devoted to the new technologies and all the new exciting things that are on the market at the moment?
Mixing that strategy and tactical piece. And I certainly find showing people the art of the possible is really important. And I think there's a lot of traditional companies who are still working on reporting in spreadsheets or very traditional, very static ways of doing BI. So very rapidly building that out into other tool sets blows their socks off. And they're absolutely amazed by it. And in all of our heads, we're thinking, yeah, that's only half the story. It's not even half the story. It's a whole bunch of stuff I want to do over here that's really going to blow your mind. So I think that it's getting them on that journey. Undoubtedly, I have spent a lot of time with my teams, and I'm looking around the room, a lot of time sorting out that BI, sorting out that MI in organisations, at the same time as trying to get on and do some advanced analytics.
I think when you start a role, it tends to be more risk averse. So you'll probably start with the data governance and move towards the other side once you've got your foundations right. But anything you build without your foundations, it's going to struggle.
And I'll come back on that as well. It's adding business value. It's where you can actually add business value. If you're spending a small piece of time sorting out a piece of reporting so it's actually useful and functional and sitting on top of governed data, that may actually produce huge business value, more so than actually spending a longer period of time doing some predictive analytics. Hype cycle. You have to set their expectations.
Yeah.
They all think you're going to come in and do advanced analytics and tell them how to run the company, make all the big decisions and save millions of pounds, perhaps. It's setting those expectations as when and what can be done.
I went and talked to our exec yesterday, where I think they were expecting what the strategy was going to be about analytics. And what I told them was that I was looking at a data estate that looked like kittens who'd been playing with wool. So I had a bit more to deal with first. Any other questions? Actually, well, one more. We've got time for one more and then we can wrap up.
Hi, yeah, thanks for the talk. I was curious, at what stage of a company does it make sense? So in terms of company size, if it's a startup or multinational conglomerate, where along that do you see a real role developing for this rather than just CTO taking all of that?
I'm sorry, I can't hear that.
Again, I think that's a really good question. I think the answer really to that is there is no answer. It all depends on the context. I think organisations first wake up to the fact that they need a CDO, regardless of size, is one, they need to sort out their data, and they've suddenly made that realisation. I think GDPR has been a big help for us in that respect, or getting commercial advantage has been a big advantage, a big driver. But I think it's also those organisations who realise that they can get competitive advantage from their data. So it's either they've got a really big data problem, or they can see that by driving into the data they can get an advantage. And I think regardless of the size, I think startups are slightly different, or the startups are focused on data, so they may need a CDO early on.
Brilliant. I just want to say thank you very much. We really appreciate you all coming, and we really appreciate the questions as well. It's how we all learn. If you just give us 10 minutes, I know that we're doing a book signing in here, so we promised Big Data London we would do it. If anybody is interested, please bear with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.